The gavel falls, not with a bang, but with a dull, dismissive thud. In the sterile chill of courtroom 3B, Alice Hayes is told she is worthless. Her ex-husband, a tech millionaire radiating arrogance in a $5,000 suit, smirks as his lawyer publicly rips her life apart. She's a failed artist, a part-time waitress, a nobody asking for scraps. The courtroom snickers, and the judge nods, ready to dismiss her. But they all missed one thing. They mocked the wrong woman. Because in 10 minutes, a name will be spoken that will bring the entire city to its knees, and the nobody in the cheap blazer will be revealed as the most powerful woman in the room. The fluorescent lights of courtroom 3B at the Heiress County Courthouse hummed a low, sickening note that seemed to drill directly into Alice Hayes's temples. Every surface, the polished wood of the pews, the chipped linoleum floor, the impassive face of Judge Maria Santos, felt cold, designed to extinguish hope. Alice sat alone at the respondent's table, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were bone white. Her blazer, a navy blue find from a thrift store, felt stiff and cheap against her skin. It was the best she had. Across the aisle, her ex-husband, Marcus Thorne, looked like he'd just stepped out of a magazine. His suit was a custom-tailored charcoal wool. His watch, a gleaming Audemars Piguet, caught the light every time he dismissively checked it. He wasn't just existing in the room, he owned it. Beside him sat his lawyer, a shark named Harrison Caldwell, whose voice was as smooth and sharp as oiled slate. "And so, Your Honor," Caldwell was saying, his voice dripping with theatrical pity, "while Mr. Thorne wishes Ms. Hayes nothing but the best, her request for $2,000 a month in spousal support is, to put it mildly, preposterous." A woman in the back row, a friend of Marcus's new girlfriend, let out a sharp, derisive snort. Alice flinched as if struck. "Mr. Thorne," Caldwell continued, gesturing to his client, "is a self-made man. He built his company, Connect Sphere, from the ground up, through grit, through genius, through 100-hour work weeks." Alice's stomach churned with a bitter acid. Self-made? And Ms. Hayes? What were her contributions? Caldwell paced in front of the judge's bench. She was, by her own admission, an aspiring painter. A noble hobby, perhaps, but not one that contributed a single dime to the marital assets. In the last year of their marriage, her total income was, and I'm quoting from her tax returns, 0. Marcus leaned over and whispered something to Caldwell. The lawyer nodded, a predatory smile spreading across his face. "My client reminds me," Caldwell said, turning his gaze directly on Alice, "that she did have one job during their marriage. She planned his parties, a task, I'm told, she often delegated to a professional caterer." The smirk on Marcus's face was unbearable. It was a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. This was the man she had loved, the man she had huddled with in a tiny one-bedroom apartment, sharing ramen noodles and dreaming of the future, the man who had held her hand and promised, "It's you and me against the world, Alice." Now he couldn't even look at her. He was texting under the table. "Your Honor," Caldwell pressed on, "Ms. Hayes is currently employed as a waitress at the Corner Bistro, a fine establishment, I'm sure. But her current station in life is not Mr. Thorne's responsibility. The marriage has been over for 8 months. He has moved on. He has been more than generous, allowing her to keep her car, a 2018 sedan, and not contesting her custody of their son. To ask for more is not just greed. It's a fantasy." Alice felt a hot tear trace a path down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. It wasn't the money. She knew she'd never see a cent of it. Not really. It was the principle. It was the lie. It was for her son, Leo, who was waiting at a friend's house, blissfully unaware that his father was in a courtroom actively trying to prove his mother was worthless. Judge Santos sighed, adjusting her glasses. She looked tired. This was her 5th divorce case before lunch. "Ms. Hayes," the judge said, her voice flat. "Mr. Caldwell raises a valid point. The documentation shows the assets, specifically the multi-million-dollar valuation of ConnectSphere, are solely in Mr. Thorne's name. Your request for alimony seems disproportionate to your documented financial contributions. On what grounds do you base this claim?" Alice stood. Her legs felt like water. Her own lawyer, a public defender named Sarah Jenkins, looked pale and outgunned. "Your Honor," Alice began, her voice trembling but clear, "my name is not on ConnectSphere, but my work is, the foundational algorithm, the code that allows the app to function. I wrote it." The room went silent for a beat. Then Marcus Thorne threw his head back and laughed. It was not a small laugh. It was a loud, barking, unrestrained sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Oh, that's priceless," he scoffed, looking at the judge as if sharing a private joke. "Your Honor, she's talking about some notes she scribbled in a diary. Doodles. I built a tech empire. She's claiming she did it while—" "What?" "Waiting for a canvas to dry," Caldwell chimed in. "Your Honor, this is a desperate, last-ditch fabrication. She has no proof, no documents, no evidence. It's the rambling of a woman who regrets leaving a life of luxury she did not earn." "I have my logbooks," Alice said, her voice rising in desperation. "I have the original server files from my university projects." "Doodles and homework," Caldwell boomed. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss this baseless claim and finalize the divorce as per Mr. Thorne's generous offer." Judge Santos looked at Alice with a profound, weary pity. "Ms. Hayes, unless you have tangible, credible evidence to present right now." Alice's shoulders slumped. The logbooks were at her apartment, the server files. Marcus had locked her out of all their shared accounts months ago. He had planned this. He had systematically erased her. She had nothing. She was exactly what they said she was, a waitress in a cheap blazer asking for scraps. She started, her voice breaking. "I have nothing. Here. Then I'm afraid I have no choice," the judge began. Clack, clack, clack. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. The sound was sharp, confident, and utterly out of place. Every head turned. A man stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was tall, in his late 60s, with a shock of perfectly coiffed silver hair. His suit was not just expensive, it was a statement. A dark, bespoke suit from what could only be Savile Row. He carried a slim, monogrammed leather briefcase. He strode into the courtroom, his hard-soled shoes echoing on the floor. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at the spectators. He walked directly to the empty space beside Alice's public defender and set his briefcase on the table. Caldwell, interrupted mid-victory, looked furious. "Your Honor, this is a private proceeding. Who is this man?" The man adjusted his silk tie. He looked at Judge Santos with eyes as grey and cold as a winter sea. "My apologies for the interruption, Your Honor." His voice was a deep, cultured baritone that commanded silence. "My name is Arthur Sterling, of the firm Sterling and Locke." A ripple went through the room. Even Judge Santos sat up strala. Sterling and Locke wasn't just a law firm. They were kingmakers. They represented old money, global corporations, and shadow billionaires. They didn't do family court. "And what is your purpose here, Mr. Sterling?" the judge asked, her voice suddenly respectful. "I am here," Sterling said, his gaze finally flicking to Alice, with a flicker of something. Kindness. To represent the primary stakeholder in this matter. Marcus laughed again, but this time it was nervous, uncertain. Stakeholder? What are you talking about? This is my divorce. There are no other stakeholders. Arthur Sterling allowed himself a thin, cold smile. He snapped open his briefcase. "You're mistaken, Mr. Thorne," Sterling said, his voice dropping, yet filling the entire room. "I am here on behalf of my client, Ms. Alice Vance." The name Vance hung in the air for 3 full seconds, utterly meaningless to everyone in the room. Except one. Marcus Thorne's face, which had been a mask of smug amusement, instantly crumpled. The blood drained from it, leaving a sick, pale greenish tint. He wasn't just surprised, he was terrified. "What did you say?" Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. Harrison Caldwell, for his part, was just confused. "Vance? Your Honor, her name is Hayes, Alice Hayes." "A common misconception," Sterling said smoothly, pulling a sheaf of documents from his briefcase and handing a set to the judge's clerk. "Alice Vance Hayes. She is the daughter of my other client, Mr. Alistair Vance." A new sound rippled through the gallery. Not a snicker this time, but a sharp, collective gasp. A reporter in the back row, who had been half asleep covering the docket, suddenly sat bolt upright and began typing furiously into his phone. Alistair Vance. The name was a myth. A ghost. Alistair Vance was the reclusive, genius founder of Aperture Technologies, a man who had built the very microprocessors that powered 90% of the world's computers and communications. He was a man who had vanished from public life 2 decades ago, living on a private, fortified island. A man whose net worth was estimated by Forbes to be in the realm of $88 billion. He was also famously, obsessively private and known to have no family. Judge Santos stared at the documents. "Mr. Sterling, this is a certified birth certificate, and this appears to be a newly activated trust document. Is this real?" "It is, Your Honor," Sterling said. "Ms. Vance is the sole designated heiress to the entire Vance Foundation and the Aperture estate. Her status as secret was at her father's direct and legally binding request. Until today." Alice finally looked up. Her eyes met Sterling's. He was her father's man, the one who had sent her small, anonymous checks for art supplies in college, the only lifeline Alistair had ever allowed. His presence here meant one thing. The test was over. "This is insane," Caldwell blustered, trying to regain control. "She's a waitress. This is a fabrication, a desperate, pathetic—" "A waitress, yes," Sterling interrupted, his voice like ice. "A position she was forced into after her husband, Mr. Thorne, systematically locked her out of their joint accounts, cancelled her credit cards, and drained their son's college fund, all while she was trying to secure housing for herself and her child. She chose to support her son through honest, grueling work, rather than return to a man who had become emotionally and financially abusive." He turned to Marcus. The terror on Marcus's face was now mixing with a wild, desperate confusion. "But you told me," Marcus stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Alice. "You said you were disowned. You said he'd cut you off. You lied to me." Alice finally spoke. Her voice was no longer a whisper. It was cold, clear, and full of a power she hadn't realized she still possessed. "I told you the truth, Marcus. My father and I were estranged. He disapproved of you." "Disapproved?" Marcus shrieked. "I built a $100 million company. What's to disapprove of?" "He called you an opportunist with hollow bones," Alice recalled, the memory stinging. "He said you didn't see me. You saw an angle, a stepping stone. He was right, Sterling added flatly. This was the truth that had haunted her marriage. Alice had met Marcus at a small gallery show during her senior year at Stanford, where she was studying computer science with a minor in fine art. He was a business student, all charisma and dazzling promises. She was brilliant but quiet, more comfortable with code and canvas than with people. And she was lonely. She was the daughter of a ghost, a man who loved her, but loved his isolation more. When she'd brought Marcus to meet Alistair, a rare, tense dinner at a San Francisco high-rise, her father had been polite, but his eyes, the same grey as Sterling's, had seen right through Marcus's charm. Afterward, Alistair had given her the ultimatum. This man will destroy you, Alice. He's a parasite dressed in ambition. If you marry him, you are on your own. I will not fund my own daughter's destruction. My door will be open when you finally see the truth. But until then, you will not have access to a single dollar. I need to know if you are a Vance or just his next victim. Alice, stubborn, in love, and desperate to prove her father wrong, chose Marcus. She had been disowned. She had been cut off. They had struggled. And in those early years, she had been happy. She'd truly believed they were a team. It was her, the brilliant coder and artist, and him, the charismatic salesman. It was Alice who, late one night, frustrated with the clunky social media apps of the day, sketched out an idea. What if, she'd mused, it wasn't about connecting with strangers, but about filtering the world? An app that learns your preferences, your needs, your work, and only shows you what's relevant. A connect sphere. Marcus had kissed her, told her she was a genius, and got to work on the business plan. She'd spent the next 6 months in a coding fever dream, building the back end, designing the algorithm that made it all work. The moment the first seed money came in, Marcus changed. He insisted his name be the only one on the incorporation papers. "It's cleaner, baby," he'd said. "Investors get weird about husband and wife teams." He started calling her algorithm his proprietary tech. He belittled her art. "You should really focus on the house, Alice. We're entertaining investors now. This painting thing. It's a cute hobby, but it's not our future." The birth of their son, Leo, should have brought them together. Instead, it gave Marcus his final tool of control. He used her love for Leo to isolate her, to make her feel dependent, until the brilliant woman who had designed his empire was convinced she was just a mom and a failed artist. And now, in the courtroom, the man who had stolen her work, her life, and her identity was staring at her as if she were a ghost. "She lied!" Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. "She's a liar. This whole marriage was a setup." "A setup?" Sterling asked, raising a perfectly plucked eyebrow. "Mr. Thorne, you are the one who just sat here and allowed your counsel to paint the mother of your child as an indigent, talentless fool. You who took her work, her name, and her dignity. You weren't set up, Mr. Thorne. You were observed." Sterling turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, as I was saying, Miss Vance is the sole heiress to the Vance estate, which brings us to the matter at hand." He reached into his briefcase again. "We are, of course, no longer petitioning for $2,000 a month in spousal support." "That would be," he said, with the slightest hint of a smirk, "preposterous." Caldwell looked relieved for a microsecond. "Instead," Sterling continued, "we are filing this. A separate, immediate civil suit against Mr. Marcus Thorne and his company, Connect Sphere, for intellectual property theft, fraudulent representation, and breach of partnership." He dropped a stack of binders on the table that was at least a foot high. "We are seeking," Sterling announced to the stunned courtroom. A 75% controlling stake in ConnectSphere, to be transferred immediately to Ms. Vance. And for her pain and suffering, and for the intentional theft of her work, we are seeking $500 million in punitive damages. Harrison Caldwell's knees audibly buckled. He grabbed the edge of his table to stay upright. Marcus Thorne just stared, his mouth open, a small, choked sound rattling in his throat. "You can't," Marcus whispered. "You can't. I'm self-made." "Oh, we can," Sterling said. "You see, Mr. Thorne, you're right. Ms. Hayes didn't have her logbooks here today. But I do." The courtroom, which had been buzzing with shocked whispers, fell into a silence so profound it was almost violent. Harrison Caldwell's face was the color of old parchment. He was a shark, yes, but he was a shark who swam in the kiddie pool of local family court. Arthur Sterling was a great white who ruled the open ocean. I object," Caldwell stammered, his bravado completely shattered. This is inadmissible. This is a divorce hearing, not a corporate espionage trial. You can't just ambush us with this." Judge Santos, who now looked very, very awake, peered at Sterling over her glasses. "He has a point, Mr. Sterling. This is highly irregular." "It is, Your Honor," Sterling agreed calmly. "But the circumstances are, as you can see, equally irregular. Mr. Thorne, through his counsel, has based his entire argument for denying spousal support on the claim that Ms. Vance made 0 contributions, and that her claims of intellectual contribution were doodles and homework. We are not here to debate the divorce. We are here to correct the record upon which this court is being asked to base its judgment." He turned and, for the first time, addressed Caldwell directly. "You, sir, opened this door. You put Miss Vance's contributions on trial. My client is simply walking through it." Sterling tapped the top binder. "This," he said, "is Ms. Vance's senior thesis from Stanford University, dated 2 years before ConnectSphere was incorporated. It's titled Algorithmic Empathy, a Framework for Predictive Social Filtering. It contains, verbatim, the foundational code that Mr. Thorne filed as his own patent." Marcus's head snapped up. That's a lie. That was a theoretical paper. "With functional executable code," Sterling countered. "Code which, curiously, matches the back end of your app, line for line, bug for bug. And these," he tapped a second binder, "are Ms. Vance's personal logbooks from that time, detailing her process. And these," a third, "are the original server logs from the university, time-stamped and certified, which we subpoenaed last month." "Last month?" Marcus whispered. This hadn't been a sudden decision. This had been a planned, meticulous execution. "But we have more than that," Sterling said, his voice becoming almost conversational. "Mr. Thorne, do you recall a man named James Anderson?" The name hit Marcus harder than the Vance reveal. If his face had been pale before, it was now a deathly, translucent white. He looked like he was going to be sick, right there on the polished floor. James Anderson had been Marcus's original partner, another business student who had helped him write the initial business plan. A year into the company, just before the first major round of funding, Marcus had forced him out, accusing him of embezzlement, a lie, and threatening him with legal action, until James, broke and terrified, had signed away his 10% equity for a one-time payment of $5,000. "We located Mr. Anderson in Portland, where he's been working as a high school math teacher," Sterling explained. "He was more than happy to provide a signed, notarized affidavit detailing how you and he plotted to minimize Ms. Vance's role from the very beginning, how you called her the golden goose, who was too stupid to know she was laying eggs. Those are his words, Mr. Thorne, not mine." And, Sterling added, as a final, brutal flourish, Mr. Anderson's affidavit also includes a detailed account of how you used the company's seed money to hire a private investigator to dig up dirt on Alice's family, trying to find leverage in case she ever got smart. The gallery gasped. This wasn't just theft. It was a level of sociopathic betrayal that was chilling to the bone. He found nothing, of course, Sterling said, because Mr. Alistair Vance, as you can imagine, is not a man who leaves leverage lying around. But the intent, Your Honor, the intent is clear. This was never a partnership. It was a long con. Marcus was no longer sitting. He was slumped over the table, his head in his hands, making a strange, high-pitched keening sound. His $5,000 suit looked like a costume on a broken mannequin. Harrison Caldwell, seeing his client and his own career implode, did the only thing he could. He threw himself on the mercy of the court. Your Honor, in light of this new information, he said, his voice weak, we request a continuance, a recess, to review these allegations. Denied, Judge Santos said, her voice like flint. The pity she'd felt for Alice was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous fury directed at the other table. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, your claims are substantial. But this is still a family court. I am aware, Your Honor, Sterling said, which is why we are prepared to offer Mr. Thorne a one-time settlement to resolve all matters, both civil and domestic, today. Right now. Alice looked at Sterling, confused. She hadn't agreed to this. He gave her a tiny, imperceptible, trust me nod. We will drop the request for $500 million in punitive damages, Sterling announced. We will also allow Mr. Thorne to retain 10% of Connect's fare, a finder's fee, if you will. We will also not pursue criminal charges for the patent fraud, which I assure you would carry a hefty prison sentence. It was, in the face of the evidence, an incredibly generous offer. Marcus's head slowly lifted. He saw a lifeline. In exchange, Sterling continued, Mr. Thorne will, of course, grant Ms. Vance 90% of the company, effective immediately. He will sign over this prepared, irrevocable confession of his intellectual property theft to be held in trust by my firm. He will vacate his position as CEO. He will cede full custody of their son, Leo, to Miss Vance. And he will pay her the $2,000 a month in spousal support she originally requested. Marcus blinked. What? Why? After all this, why the $2,000? Alice finally understood. It wasn't about the money. It was about the point. It was about the word no. She stood up, her back straight. She looked at the man she had once loved, the man who had laughed in her face, and she gave her first command as Alice Vance. Because you said I wasn't worth it, she said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room. Because I am. And because you will be reminded of it, in a check you sign with your own hand, every month for the rest of your life. It was a masterful, devastating stroke. Not just a victory, but a humiliation. A precise, surgical reversal of the very mockery he had inflicted on her. Mr. Thorne? Judge Santos asked. Do you accept these terms? Marcus looked at his lawyer. Caldwell gave a frantic, desperate nod. Take the deal, you fool. Marcus stared at Alice, the woman he had mocked as a failed artist and waitress. The woman he had erased. She was no longer Alice Hayes. She was Alice Vance, and she held a nuclear warhead in her hands, aimed directly at his life. Yes, Marcus Thorne whispered, the word barely audible. I accept. Judge Santos banged her gavel. Then it is so ordered. This court is adjourned. The moment the gavel fell, The courtroom doors flew open, and a blinding wall of flashbulbs erupted. The reporter in the back row had done his job well. The news of Alistair Vance's secret billionaire heiress had hit the wire services before Judge Santos had even finished speaking. The hallway was a mob of shouting journalists, cameras and microphones. Miss Vance, is it true? Alice, why were you waitressing? What will happen to Connect Sphere? Marcus, his face a mask of waxy horror, tried to slip out a side door, but the crowd swarmed him. Mr. Thorne, did you steal your wife's company? Is it true you're a fraud? He put his hands up, stumbling like a drunk, and was bundled away by a stunned-looking Caldwell, who was already receiving frantic, vibrating calls from his partners. Marcus Thorne, the self-made man, was being publicly unmade in real time. Arthur Sterling, meanwhile, had placed a steadying hand on Alice's back. Walk with me, Miss Vance. We have a car waiting. Two broad-shouldered men in identical dark suits appeared from nowhere, parting the sea of reporters like a bulldozer. They formed a protective triangle around Alice and Sterling, guiding them through the chaos. Alice didn't look at the cameras. She kept her head high, her eyes focused on the exit sign. She felt a strange, terrifying lightness, as if she were floating. The humming in her head had been replaced by a roaring silence. They burst through the front doors of the courthouse and into the afternoon sun. A gleaming, black Bentley Mulsanne was idling at the curb. One of the bodyguards opened the door, and Sterling guided her in. The door shut, and the world went utterly silent. The car was soundproofed. The tinted windows turned the shouting mob into a silent movie. Alice finally let out the breath she felt she had been holding for 5 years. She began to shake, her entire body trembling with the adrenaline crash. It's over, Sterling said softly from the seat opposite her. He handed her a bottle of water from a small refrigerator. It's done. He agreed, she whispered, her hands trembling so much she could barely hold the bottle. Just like that. He had no choice, Sterling said. The evidence was absolute. Mr. Thorne is many things, but he is not stupid enough to choose total annihilation over mere ruin. He chose the 10%. He'll be a very wealthy man for the rest of his life, but he will never have power again. You will. And James Anderson? Alice asked. The man he cheated? We've already been in contact. Sterling smiled. He will be well compensated for his testimony. In fact, I believe he'll be receiving a call this afternoon with a job offer, should he want it. I hear Connect Sphere is in the market for a new, ethical CEO. Tears streamed down Alice's face now, not of sadness, but of a profound, shattering relief. The man who had been teaching high school math was about to get his company back. The lie was undone. The Bentley pulled away from the curb and slid silently into traffic. Where are we going? Alice asked, wiping her face. I need to pick up Leo. We're on our way to him now, Sterling said. He's not at your friend's house. We moved him about an hour ago, when we knew the story was about to break. He's safe. And he has a visitor. Alice's heart stopped. A visitor? The car drove for 20 minutes, leaving the city centre and heading towards the ultra-wealthy enclave of River Oaks, an area of town she had only ever driven through as a tourist. It pulled up to a set of imposing 20-foot-high steel gates, which opened without a sound. They drove down a long, tree-lined drive to a house that looked less like a home and more like a modern art museum, all glass and white stone and impossible angles. The car stopped. The bodyguard opened her door. Alice stepped out onto the marble pathway. The front door of the mansion opened. Her son, Leo, 4 years old, ran out, his face lit up with a huge smile. Mommy, this house has a pool in the kitchen. Alice swept him up into a hug, burying her face in his hair, inhaling the scent of him. "I'm here, baby. I'm here. I love you so much." "I missed you," he mumbled into her neck. "Grandpa's here." Alice froze. She looked up. A man was standing in the doorway. He was older, gaunt, and leaning heavily on a simple wooden cane. He wore a simple beige cardigan and linen slacks. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a retired professor. But his eyes were the same as Sterling's, the same as her own. Sharp, brilliant, and currently full of a deep, complicated emotion. Alistair Vance. She hadn't seen him in person in 6 years. "You came," she whispered, still holding Leo. "You called," he replied, his voice rough with disuse. He had flown from his island on a private jet the moment Sterling had confirmed the court date. She had made the call 2 weeks ago, after Marcus had thrown his final, cruelest insult. She'd found an old encrypted number for Sterling, a break-in case of war line her father had given her years ago. She had called, her voice thick with tears. "Mr. Sterling, it's Alice. I need help. I'm ready. I see the truth." Within an hour, a team of lawyers had descended. The plan was set in motion. Now she stood before her father, no longer a rebellious girl or a broken wife, but a woman who had survived. Alistair looked at her, then at his grandson in her arms. "He has your eyes," Alistair said. "He has your stubbornness," Alice replied, with a small, watery smile. Alistair Vance slowly opened his arms. It was an invitation. Alice walked forward, still clutching her son, and stepped into her father's embrace. The three of them stood in the doorway of the great, empty house. The estranged daughter, the reclusive father, and the young son who was the bridge between them. "I was proud," Alistair whispered, his voice cracking just once. "But I was wrong to make you do it alone. I wanted to build a fortress around you, Alice, but I built a wall instead. I'm sorry." "I'm sorry too," Alice cried, holding on to him. "You were right about him. You were right about everything." "Not everything," Alistair said, pulling back to look at her. He gestured with his cane back toward the city. "I tested you, to see if you were strong enough to run my empire. But I was wrong. You were never meant to run my empire." He smiled, a rare, bright thing. "You were meant to build your own." The fallout from courtroom 3B was not a ripple. It was a tidal wave. By 3:00 p.m., Marcus Thorne fraud was the #1 trending topic worldwide. By 4:00 p.m., ConnectSphere's stock, which was publicly traded, had entered a free fall. Trading was automatically halted as its value plummeted by 80% in a single hour. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting and, seeing the undeniable proof of Sterling's lawsuit, summarily fired Marcus Thorne. His corporate credit cards were shut off, his access to the building was revoked, and a picture of his face was handed to building security. The COO, Chloe, the woman Marcus had been having an affair with, was seen leaving the ConnectSphere headquarters with a single, small box of her belongings, her face streaked with tears. She had been fired for complicity. The empire Marcus had built on Alice's stolen genius was decapitated in less than 3 hours. Marcus himself was last seen at the airport, alone, trying to book a one-way ticket to a country with no extradition treaty. He was stopped by a U.S. Marshal. While Sterling and Locke had agreed not to pursue criminal charges, the Securities and Exchange Commission, upon learning that the company's entire valuation was based on a fraudulent patent, had no such agreement. Marcus was arrested for securities fraud and wire fraud. His mockery in the courtroom had cost him his company. His lies had cost him his freedom. Meanwhile, in the quiet, sun-drenched mansion in River Oaks, Alice was having her first real meal in months. It was just sandwiches, but they were served on porcelain, and she ate with her father and her son, and she felt safe. "The company is in chaos," Sterling reported, joining them in the dining room, his phone in his hand. "The board has accepted our terms. They are formally requesting you take over as interim CEO." Alice looked up from wiping a smudge of jelly off Leo's cheek. "Me? But I don't know how to run a company." "You know how to write the code," Alistair said, sipping his tea. "You know the product better than anyone. The rest is just managing people's expectations. You'll be fine." "And you'll have help," Sterling added. James Anderson accepted the position of Chief Operating Officer. He's on a flight from Portland tonight. Alice's head was spinning. This morning, she had woken up in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment, her biggest worry being whether she'd make enough in tips to cover the electric bill. Tonight, she was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar technology company. "First," Sterling said, "we need to do damage control. The press is rabid. They need a narrative. They need to see you." He was right. The story being told was one of a victim, a poor little rich girl who had been rescued by her powerful father. Alice shook her head. "No," she said, her voice firm. "That's not the story. That's not what happened." She stood up. "Mr. Sterling, please arrange a press conference for tomorrow morning on the steps of the Connect Sphere building." "Alice, that's not wise," her father interjected. "They'll tear you apart. Let the lawyers handle it." "They tore Alice Hayes apart," she said, meeting her father's gaze. "They haven't met Alice Vance. I will not be rescued. I will not be a victim. I endured, and I fought back, and I will be the one to tell my story." Alistair Vance studied his daughter for a long moment. The timid, heartbroken woman from the courtroom was gone. In her place was someone he recognized, someone who looked, for the first time, like him. He nodded. "Sterling, do as she says. Full security." The next morning, Alice Vance walked out of the front doors of the Connect Sphere headquarters. She was not wearing a thrift store blazer. She wore a sharply tailored white pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was clean, her gaze direct. She looked like a leader. The mob of reporters was even bigger than the day before. She walked directly to the podium, tapped the microphone, and the crowd fell silent. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was steady, broadcast over the speakers. "My name is Alice Vance. Yesterday in court, my ex-husband said I was a failed artist. He was wrong. I am an artist, and I am a coder, and I am a mother, and I am the creator of the Connect Sphere platform." She didn't read from a script. She spoke from the heart. "For 5 years, I was told my work didn't matter. I was told my voice didn't matter. I was told I didn't matter. This is a story that many, many women will recognize. We are the secret partners, the support staff, the inspiration for the men who take the credit. Today, that ends." A ripple of applause started from some of the female reporters in the crowd. Connect Sphere was built on a lie. As of today, it will be rebuilt on a foundation of truth. My first act as CEO is to announce that we are giving 20% of the company's equity back to its employees. My second act is to welcome Mr. James Anderson, the man who was cheated out of this company alongside me, as our new COO. And my third act, she said, her voice ringing with passion, is to launch the Vance Hayes Foundation for Second Chances. It will be funded by the 10% equity I took from Mr. Thorne, and it will be dedicated to providing legal aid and startup capital for any woman, any mother, any person who has had their work stolen from them and needs help fighting back. She had turned her humiliation into a war cry. She wasn't just taking back her company, she was starting a movement. She finished her speech and, without taking questions, turned and walked back into the building. Her new COO, James Anderson, his eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude, waiting to hold the door for her. The next day, the headlines were different. The Heiress who fights back. Alice Vance reclaims her empire. From waitress to CEO, the new face of tech. In the corner bistro, her old boss, Maria, watched the news on the small TV above the bar, tears streaming down her face. "I knew it," she whispered to the other waitresses. "I told you she was special." The first 6 months were a blur of impossible work. Alice, James, and the team they were building essentially tore ConnectSphere down to its foundations and started over. The company had been built on Marcus's personality. Flashy, aggressive, and hollow. The internal culture was toxic, a boys' club built on fear and burnout. Alice's first all-hands meeting was legendary. She stood before the 300 employees, many of whom were expecting to be fired, and did the unexpected. "I know what it's like to be undervalued," she told them. "I know what it's like to work hard on something, only to have someone else take the credit. That culture ends now. This is no longer Marcus Thorne's company. This is our company." She didn't just change the policies, she changed the physical space. She tore down the intimidating executive offices on the top floor, including Marcus's, which had its own private bar and putting green, and turned the entire floor into an open-plan collaborative space. She installed a world-class, free daycare center on the second floor, fulfilling a desperate need for the working parents in her company. Her new office was a simple glass-walled room on the main engineering floor, right next to the junior coders. She worked alongside them, her sleeves rolled up, her fingers flying across a keyboard. She wasn't just a CEO, she was the chief architect. She dived back into her original code, the doodles Marcus had mocked, and found they were still brilliant. She began to refine them, to build on them. James Anderson, invigorated and grateful, proved to be a masterful COO. He handled the operations, the logistics, the finances, healing the internal wounds of the company, while Alice healed its soul. There were, of course, challenges. A contingent of Marcus's loyalists, all men, all in senior positions, staged a quiet rebellion, refusing to take direction from her. "They're calling you the Queen," James told her, frustrated, in a late-night meeting. "They're slow-walking your directives. They think you're just a figurehead." Alice nodded. She'd expected this. "Schedule a product review meeting," she said, "with that team, tomorrow, 8 a.m. The next morning, the 6 male VPs sat sullenly in the boardroom. The lead engineer, a man named Ben, presented their progress on a new feature, a project Marcus had greenlit. Alice listened patiently. When he was done, she walked to the whiteboard. "It's inefficient," she said. Ben scoffed. "With all due respect, Ms. Vance, this is complex network architecture. It's not painting." Alice picked up a marker. "Your query," she said, "is hitting the database with a 3.4-second latency because you're using a nested loop join for a dataset this large. It's sloppy." She began to write code on the whiteboard. Pure, elegant, complex code. "If you restructure the query," she continued, her hand moving rapidly, "and create a bitmap index on the user status attribute, you can reduce the latency to 0.4 seconds. Like this." She filled the entire whiteboard in 5 minutes. The VPs stared, their mouths open. The code was perfect. It was faster, cleaner, and more brilliant than anything they had ever seen. Alice put the cap back on the marker. "I'm not the Queen," she said, her voice quiet but deadly serious. "I'm the architect. Your job is to build what I design. If you can't, I will find someone who can. Are we clear?" The lead engineer, Ben, looked at the whiteboard, then at her. The condescension was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated awe. "Yes, CEO," he said. Crystal clear. The rebellion was over before it began. Her personal life was also rebuilding. Her father, Alistair, had not returned to his island. He'd taken up residence in the River Oaks mansion, claiming the air was better for him. In truth, he was making up for lost time. He was, to his own surprise, an excellent grandfather. Alice would come home from work to find her reclusive, tech billionaire father on the floor with Leo, patiently explaining the physics of how a Lego tower stayed standing. "He's a Vance," Alistair would grumble happily. "He needs to understand foundational structure." Alice began to paint again. Her father had converted one of the massive sunrooms into an art studio for her. Her first new painting was not of a landscape or a person. It was a chaotic, abstract swirl of dark blues and greys, with a single brilliant, defiant white line shooting through the center. She titled it Courtroom 3B. A year passed. ConnectSphere, rebranded as Aperture Connect, was the tech world's comeback story of the decade. Under Alice's leadership, the app wasn't just a social tool, it became a platform for professional collaboration and ethical data sharing. Its stock price not only recovered, it tripled. But the real change was in the Vance Hayes Foundation. The 10% of equity Alice had taken from Marcus was now worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The foundation became a powerhouse. Its first public victory was the case of a young chef in New Orleans whose male business partner had stolen her restaurant concept and recipes, leaving her with nothing. The foundation's lawyers, led by a new division at Sterling and Locke, took the case pro bono and won. The second was a group of female graphic designers in Austin who had been systematically underpaid and had their work plagiarized by their parent company. The foundation funded their lawsuit and their new, independent studio. Alice had become a symbol. She was no longer just a CEO, she was a champion. One evening, Alice was working late in her studio when Arthur Sterling was announced. He walked in, looking as impeccable as ever, but with a rare, genuine smile. "Alice," he said, "I'm afraid I have some news about your ex-husband." Alice paused, her paintbrush hovering. She realized with a jolt that she hadn't thought about Marcus in months. "Oh? Is he out of prison?" "He is," Sterling said. "He was released early for good behavior. His securities fraud conviction was federal, so it was a shorter sentence than we might have liked." "That's fine," Alice said, turning back to her canvas. "He has no power. He doesn't matter." "Well," Sterling cleared his throat. "That's just it. He's been trying to matter. He's been shopping a book proposal. Self-made, self-destroyed. My life with the Heiress. It's not flattering. He paints himself as the victim, you as the manipulative, cold-hearted Vance." Alice sighed. "Of course he does. Can we sue him for libel?" "We could," Sterling said. "But I don't think we'll need to. It seems Mr. Thorne has run into a small problem. No publisher will touch it." "Why not?" Alice asked, surprised. "Because the moment he announced it, 3 of the largest publishing houses in the world were suddenly faced with complications. The first, it seems, just had its primary investor pull out. The second is suddenly facing a hostile takeover bid from an anonymous conglomerate. And the third," Sterling smiled, "just had its entire server system mysteriously crash." Alice looked up, stunned. That's not the foundation, is it?" "Good heavens, no," Sterling said, looking aghast. "The foundation is a beacon of ethical justice. This is something else entirely." "Then who?" Sterling's smile widened. Your father, it seems, has taken up a new hobby in his retirement. He calls it market corrections for annoying people. He wanted me to pass along that he finds Marcus very annoying." Alice burst out laughing, a full, joyous, unrestrained laugh. Her reclusive father, her ghost, was protecting her from afar. "And one more thing," Sterling said, handing her a small, velvet-covered box. "This was delivered to the office, from your ex-husband." Alice opened it. Inside, nestled on the velvet, was a single, crisp check for $2,000. It was the first spousal support payment he'd made since his release. The memo line was blank. "He's broke," Alice realized. The 10% he had was seized by the SEC to pay the fines. He has nothing. "He's currently working as a consultant," Sterling said, the word dripping with disdain, "which I believe is a euphemism for unemployed. He's living in a rented condo. This check, I'm told, represents nearly all of his liquid assets for the month." Alice looked at the check. The $2,000 that had once been her desperate plea, the symbol of her humiliation. Now, it was his. She picked up a pen, signed the back of the check, and handed it back to Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," Alice said, "please donate this, and every check that follows it, directly to the Corner Bistro. Give it to Maria, my old boss. Tell her to use it for a staff bonus fund." She would not be haunted by him. She would not even be enriched by him. His monthly reminder of his failure would, instead, become a monthly reward for the women she used to work with. His humiliation was now their bonus. It was the perfect, final, and most fitting end to the entire affair. 5 years later. The name Alice Vance was synonymous with a new kind of power. Aperture Connect had revolutionized ethical tech, and the Vance Hayes Foundation had legally and financially empowered thousands of people. But today, Alice was not at her office. She was at the Heiress County Courthouse. She was not, however, in courtroom 3B. She was in the main atrium, which was packed with press, politicians, and local leaders. She was standing at a podium, not as a respondent, but as the guest of honor. Behind her, a plaque was being unveiled. The Alice Vance Center for Legal Justice. She had funded a new, massive wing for the courthouse, dedicated entirely to providing free, high-end legal aid for victims of domestic and financial abuse. It would be staffed by the best lawyers, all paid for by her foundation. Alistair Vance sat in the front row, looking frail but immensely proud, holding the hand of a 9-year-old Leo. Maria from the Corner Bistro, which Alice now owned, having gifted the deed to Maria, was there, along with James Anderson and Ben, the engineer who was now her loyal Chief Technology Officer. Even Judge Maria Santos, now retired, was in the front row, beaming. Alice stepped up to the microphone. She was the same woman who had trembled in this building, but she was also entirely new. She was radiant, confident, and, above all, at peace. "The last time I stood in this building," she began, her voice echoing in the atrium, "a man laughed at me. He laughed because I was a waitress. He laughed because I was an artist. He laughed because I was a woman he thought he had successfully erased. He was wrong. He thought my value was in my name, in the money I might one day inherit. He was wrong about that too. My father," she nodded to Alistair, "gave me a great gift. Not his money, but his ultimatum. He forced me to find a strength I didn't know I had. He forced me to endure. Today we open a place for everyone else who is enduring. A place that says, 'We see you.' A place that says, 'Your work matters.' A place that says, 'You will not be erased.'" She looked around the room at the people she had helped and the life she had built from the ashes of her old one. "A name," she concluded, "is just a word. An inheritance is just paper. True power, the only power that lasts, is the strength you find when you have nothing left to lose. I was never an heiress to a fortune. I was an heiress to myself, and that is an inheritance that no one can ever take from you. The room exploded in a standing ovation. Alice smiled, found her son's face in the crowd, and winked. Leo beamed back. She had done it. She had taken the worst day of her life and turned it into a legacy that would outlive them all. She was no longer the ex-wife, the victim, or the secret. She was simply Alice Vance. In the end, it wasn't the billions that saved Alice. It was her value. Marcus Thorne saw a worthless waitress, but her father saw a Vance. The courtroom saw a victim, but Arthur Sterling saw a client. And most importantly, Alice herself finally saw the woman who had been there all along. An artist, a mother, and a genius. The world will always try to tell you what you're worth. Don't let them. What did you think of Alice's story? Did Marcus get what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below what your favorite twist was. This story is a reminder that the most powerful inheritance is your own strength. If you were moved by Alice's journey, please hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power, and be sure to subscribe for more dramatic, real-life stories every single week. You never know whose life you might change.